over. Raghuram Rajan's successor is still not over, with the government yet to make its choice public. But Network 18 learns that the race is now down to 3 players, 2 of whom are or already have been an RBI Deputy Governor, namely Rajan's present colleague Urjit Patel and former Deputy Governor Subir Gokran, who is at the IMF currently. The third person in the fray is Rajan's successor at North Block, Arvind Subramanian, a world-renowned economist and someone who works very closely with the Finance Minister and, of course, his team as the Chief Economic Advisor at the Finance Ministry. Now, even as the government continues the hunt for the next RBI governor, former Governor D Subbarao is back in the news. In his memoirs titled "Who Moved My Interest Rate?", Subbarao lays down threadbare the tussle between the central bank and the then UPA government. Well, Latha has been breezing through some of the pages of that book. She's joining us live. Latha, what sense did you get? Quite a few of those revelations.
It's the most interesting book. I've read it cover to cover, word to word, and actually twice over. It's an extremely absorbing book. And what I would say is the meat of the book is this constant tussle between the Finance Ministry and the Reserve Bank. Before I get to it, let's remind you of the height of that battle between Chidambaram and former Governor D Subbarao.
Government has to walk alone to face the challenge of growth. Well, we'll walk alone.
I do hope Finance Minister Chidambaram will one day say, I'm often frustrated by the Reserve Bank, so frustrated that I want to go for a walk, even if I have to walk alone. But thank God the Reserve Bank exists.
Well, this relationship, this tug of war between Subbarao and the Finance Ministry is the defining part of that book. It's called "Who Moved My Interest Rate?". It is about 325 pages, 16 chapters, but the meat of the chapter is a chapter 9 called "Walking Alone." Clearly from that sentence you just heard, when Chidambaram said he will walk alone, the government will walk alone. One of the key things that Subbarao states over there is that almost every finance minister is on the page of wanting lower rates, and the Reserve Bank is not able to oblige. In fact, let me read that out to you. Subbarao quotes a paragraph from Chidambaram. Chidambaram, in writing for the Indian Express on 2nd August 2015, wrote, "On 8 out of 10 monetary policy statements or actions, the government and the Reserve Bank will be, and in the past, have been on the same page." Responding to this, Subbarao writes in his book, "Chidambaram was finance minister for far longer than I was governor. The ballpark average that he cites, agreement 8 out of 10 times, may be his experience, but it certainly does not accord with mine." Subbarao goes on to say that almost every time there was a war between him and the Finance Ministry on the issue of interest rates. But that was not the only one. The other highlight of this chapter, Walking Alone, is the price that the Reserve Bank had to pay for choosing to be so autonomous. And here again, let me get another quote that you're just reading. "There is a price to pay for not falling in line. The government has several ways of showing its displeasure, and the way it chose to do so with me was by going against my recommendations in the appointment of deputy governors in the Reserve Bank." So basically he says that he made 2 sacrifices. Usha Thorat and Subir Gokran did not get an extension because Subbarao was seen as too independent and was being punished. Let me read that part about Usha Thorat. Subbarao says in his book, "I sought a meeting with Pranab Mukherjee, incidentally only one of the 2 occasions when I met him one-on-one, and requested that Usha be reappointed because of her competence, track record, and because she met the eligibility criteria for appointment. He knew that he would not call into question Usha's competence or track record. It would have been presumptuous on his part to override my judgment on this issue with his own. He pleaded rules instead, but I was prepared for that point. I told him the government had reappointed Shamala Gopinath, another deputy governor, an identical case under the same rule, and added for effect that he was the finance minister who had approved it. Pranab Mukherjee didn't budge, and Usha became a part of the price we had to pay for asserting the autonomy of the Reserve Bank. we had a replay of the same story in the case of reappointment of Subir Gokaran, whose 3-year tenure as Deputy Governor was expiring in December 2012. So that was a very candid statement that Dr. Subbarao made in terms of the price that the Governor and RBI had to pay simply because they were autonomous institutions. I will end this with one more quote on the way in which the government dilutes the Reserve Bank's ability to transmit rates. He speaks about the time when RBI would hike rates and the government would call the PSU banks and tell them not to pass on the rate hike. So again, I quote him, "The most conspicuous way in which the government had overstepped its ownership privileges was the way in which it regularly advised, in quotes, public sector banks on how to set their interest rates in response to the Reserve Bank's monetary policy stance. It had almost become standard practice for the finance minister to call a meeting of the PSU bank chiefs following each monetary policy review of the RBI and advise them not to raise their lending rates even if the Reserve Bank tightened the policy rate. This overt repression of monetary policy transmission undermined the Reserve Bank efforts to contain inflation." So, I mean, I can go on with several quotes that are candid, dignified, and yet plays in perspective the manner in which the Reserve Bank, the government, tries to repress policies of the Reserve Bank, on interest rates, on public sector banks, on the dividend that RBI pays, on deputy governor appointments, on appointments to the board of governors of RBI, and of course, the manner in which the FSLRC functioned. That again is a very interesting chapter, a set of paragraphs from Dr. Subbarao's book. But it is not just about the battle between Finance Ministry and RBI. The book also has a lot of revealing details on how the rupees tantrums in 2013 were brought under control, the discussions that went on, and the financial inclusion, and also details about how the Lehman crisis was handled by the Reserve Bank and the Finance Ministry. A most absorbing book. I would think that it is not a book only meant for finance sector experts or banking experts. It's a tell-all book which any Indian citizen will enjoy.
Well, quite fantastic. And Latha, thanks for highlighting some of those excerpts for us. I guess it doesn't get any clearer than that. The sort of influence, perhaps, that North Bloc, at least in the past, we're not commenting about the present, but at least in the past, has tried to exert on the RBI, as, of course, told to us by Mr. Subbarao.
No, that becomes important, Shurabhi, primarily because when Dr. Subbarao came in as RBI governor, he was finance secretary before that, and he was seen as finance ministry's delegate to RBI to ensure that RBI doesn't misbehave. And, the aphorisms or the titles that Subbarao earned by the time he retired was "not his master's voice," or, a person who turned against his master. So clearly, you can send anyone, the finance ministry can try its best to woo the Reserve Bank, but the lady in Mint Street has retained her voice up until now.
Well, very interesting, Latha. Thank you so much for that. We'll take a